Ben Johnson staying in Detroit? Why doesn't this guy want to be a head coach? The Super Bowl is coming up in 2 weeks. If the Chiefs win, does that make Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes the greatest coach-quarterback duo of all time? And we are going to go through each team and pick the greatest quarterback of the Super Bowl era. And this week we are starting with the AFC, coming up on Sports Talk with Dad right now. Welcome back to another amazing episode of Sports Talk with Dad. As always, my name is Kyle, and I cannot call this Sports Talk with Dad without the man sitting next to me, a man who is actually old enough to remember the last time an Ohio State player did not win the NFL Rookie of the Year, my dad, Tim.
Technically, you're old enough to remember that, too.
I know, but I wanted to point out quite the streak. There has been C.J. Stroud's going to win Rookie of the Year for the NFC this year, right? That's going to, or Offensive Rookie of the Year, I should say. They don't do the NFC, AFC. He's going to win Offensive Rookie of the Year.
Correct.
Since 2016, an Ohio State player has either won Offensive or Defensive Rookie of the Year.
And what's sad is it's probably going to happen next year with Marvin Harrison Jr.
There's a couple of studs coming out. The year after that, and the year after that, and the year after that, because Ohio State is amazing. You know who doesn't have that streak? Alabama. You know who doesn't have that streak? Georgia. You know who will never have that streak? Wisconsin. Has Wisconsin ever had a Rookie of the Year?
Are we through?
J.J. Watt Rookie of the Year? T.J. Watt Rookie of the Year?
I do not know.
I'm assuming they were.
I don't know. I would think so.
I have no idea. But for those of you that didn't know, since 2016, I just want to make sure I repeat it. Since 2016, Ohio State has had either an offense or defense named the Rookie of the Year. That's crazy stat. I mean, even you have to admit, that's insane.
I don't have to admit anything.
Okay. You know Bill O'Brien's the offensive coordinator for Ohio State now, right? They just got the number 1 transfer and number 2 transfer and number 3 transfer in the portal.
Actually. Are we going to talk about current sports, or are we going to talk about...
We need to, because we actually have a lot to talk about today. I'm actually ecstatic for this show. This is the most excited I've been for a show for a long time, because we have big news coming, and we are going to actually pick the greatest NFL quarterbacks for each team in the Super Bowl era, starting with the AFC this week. But before we do that, what is wrong with Ben Johnson?
I don't know. The report, for those of you who haven't heard yet, report came out. Ben Johnson has announced to Washington and Seattle, where he was a leading candidate for both jobs, and he's going to stay in Detroit.
Here's my question, though. Is he simply announcing this to get ahead of the curve that he didn't get those jobs?
I've heard that rumor as well. I've been watching X, as it's called now.
Yeah,
and there are
formerly known as Twitter. I love how in articles it's always like on X, formerly known as Twitter.
That'll be that way for years.
Stop.
For years.
Yeah.
But there are reports out that he didn't interview well, and he was asking for a boatload of money, which doesn't surprise me at all.
I mean, I'm not going to feel bad for anybody giving him a buttload of money. They're billionaire owners.
True. Quite honestly, he's got a great thing going in Detroit. He's got a great position. He's got a lot of talent on the offense. Maybe he just doesn't want the headaches.
I don't blame him if you can be an offense coordinator, if that is the reason. But this could also be another Eric Bieniemy situation where it's, hey, you don't have it. We're seeing this in your interviews, and we don't want you to be our head coach.
Because being a head coach is a lot more than just calling the plays.
Correct.
It's handling the press. It's handling the administration. Correct. How many times have we talked about that in Green Bay? It's a lot more involved than just coaching on the field.
What I am interested to see is Bill Belichick came out and said he wants to be a part of a smaller market team with less media. There is rumor that Andy Reid is retiring at the end of this year. If Andy Reid leaves, could Bill Belichick become the next head coach of the Kansas City Chiefs?
That would be interesting, and that would be a surprise to me. It doesn't seem like, it's his kind of team. And make no mistake, he wants Shula's record.
He does.
He needs 16 wins.
Yep.
I don't see Andy Reid retiring, to be honest with you. He loves what he does.
He does, but at some point, I can see Andy Reid. Andy Reid's also the type of guy that doesn't seem to at least need football to continue him going. You saw that with
Yeah.
Tom Landry, who died shortly after. You saw that with Bear Bryant, who died shortly after. Like, there have definitely been guys like that, and I just don't see Andy Reid being one of those guys.
Andy's got a great family. He's had some tragedies, as everybody knows, but he's got a life outside of football.
Yeah.
And, all the commercials he's done,
He's got enough money. I mean, money's never an issue for any of these guys.
Yeah, money's not the issue. He's got such a great thing going with Patrick Mahomes, though, that I think he's going to come back again.
And don't forget, he's been a head coach since 1999.
And don't forget, since he's been a head coach, he was always the coach that couldn't win the big one.
Right.
Because he never got there with the Eagles.
He got there once and got beat by the Patriots.
Right. Now he's won 4 of the last 5.
Yep.
Arguably, and I think it's going to happen, Patrick Mahomes is going to go down as the greatest quarterback of all time.
He could. He's only 28.
He's 28, and he's already won 4 of 5. The only other person to come close to that is, of course, someone near and dear to my heart, Bart Starr, who won 5 and 7.
Yeah.
So, who knows? We're going to know a lot.
This is more impressive than anything the Patriots ever did.
Yeah, because they won 6 over 20 years.
They were spread out.
Right.
Very spread out. I mean, they went to 10 and 20, but they were still spread out from there. Or 9. Was it 9 that they went to? Tom Brady went to 9. I think Patriots 8. Doesn't really matter. They went to a lot. That's all that matters.
I think the Patriots went to 2 Super Bowls without Tom Brady. Back in the 80s, they lost to the Bears.
That was it. Oh, no, they lost to the Packers.
Yeah.
Yep, with Drew Bledsoe.
Right.
That's right. I forgot all about that. Wow.
How quickly they forget. I don't.
Yeah, they got destroyed in 2 Super Bowls. And they went on their fun little streak that doesn't look like they're going to go back to ever again. But the question is, do they pass? Does Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, do they pass Tom Brady and Bill Belichick as the greatest quarterback duo of all time? Do they pass Vince Lombardi and Bart Starr?
They're getting close, I have to admit. I mean, 4 of the last 5 years, they've won.
Right.
In the modern era, nobody's ever come close to that.
No.
So, I think Patrick Mahomes is on track to go down as the greatest quarterback. He's got skills no other quarterback's ever had.
Is he a Hall of Famer right now? If he retires right now?
First ballot.
I agree.
First ballot. Not
He's
even a
already
question.
there.
Yeah.
He's only 28 years old.
Crazy.
How is that even possible?
Yeah, it's a couple things, I think. He's number one, he's a off-the-charts smart football brain.
Yeah. Well, and he's a baseball player, which you can see on the field.
Sure.
I mean, he has the baseball athletics to go with the football athletics.
He's athletic, but he's also more down to earth than most huge quarterbacks.
He's very hardworking.
He shows up, he does his thing. Jordan Love's got a lot of those kind of attributes in a very early stage, obviously, but he shows up, he does his work.
Yep.
Nothing seems too big or too worrisome for him. He never gets too high, he never gets too down on himself.
Yep.
He just goes and plays. We're going to know a whole lot because this is probably the best San Francisco team. I will have predictions next week, but personally, I think the guys with the arrowhead on their helmets is in real good shape right now. Nobody thought they were going to beat Buffalo. Then they didn't think they were going to beat Baltimore.
No.
They took it to Baltimore. Now, granted, Lamar Jackson, why they went away from the run, they had a couple drop passes, fumble at the goal line.
Everybody has a bad day and a bad game. That's just what it was. Well, it was just a bad game.
And to be honest with you, San Francisco has lost the last 2 weeks in a row. The Packers should have beat them. Detroit had them down.
Well, they haven't. They've been given 2 games. They really have. They've been given 2 games by mistakes at the end. They have been given 2 games.
Brock Purdy made plays at the end of that game to win the game.
No, they saved Christian McCaffrey to the end. I mean, for a ball to bounce off a helmet.
That was a turnaround.
That's a fluke.
That was a turnaround in that game, too.
For Gibbs to not know what play and then still to run it and then the fumble. I mean, the Lions lost that game. Same with the Packers. The Packers lost, the Lions lost. You can't say that San Francisco won either of those games.
More so in the Detroit game because they did come back, and I think Brock Purdy did make plays, and he showed he was a playmaker at the end when he needed to. Against the Packers, Savage makes that interception, the game's over.
Correct. or doesn't blow the coverage, or makes a tackle on Christian McCaffrey.
Which is why
There's three things.
Which is why they're looking for a new defensive coordinator right now and still interviewing.
2 new safeties.
Yeah, that's true.
It's going to be an interesting offseason when it comes to that.
But
we'll see what happens here. I don't know who my pick's going to be yet. I have a lot to think about. I know in my heart who I want to win because I hate San Francisco. But I don't know. It's going to be hard to pick against them. I mean, if you're talking quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes or Brock Purdy.
Well, that's not even close.
I mean,
but Brock Purdy.
The question with Patrick Mahomes is going to be,
Purdy finds a way to win.
He does. The question is going to be is how good is Patrick Mahomes going to be after Travis Kelce leaves? Because he's a different quarterback when Kelce's not on the field.
Yeah. Yeah, Kelce is his safety valve and his first go-to.
But then again, Andy Reid's always designed the tight end to be a big part of the offense. So can you just input another tight end? No, Kelce's a different.
I was going to say, Kelce is, he should be getting wide receiver money. Yeah. Because that's essentially what he is.
Well, Taylor Swift has got him a lot more money off the field. That's what bothers me about this is I just want to watch football.
I don't have a problem with it for this reason. You know how long she was on the air? Less than 25 seconds.
Not as much anymore, which is nice. But this is a Super Bowl.
I know.
She's going to perform.
Maybe.
That's going to happen. Like, God bless her. Like, she seems like a fine human being. I have no issues with her as a person at all. I just want to watch football. I don't want all the Taylor Swift stories anymore.
And you know what
I'm over it.
You know what the NFL wants? All the Taylor Swift fans to have their eyes on that game.
Oh, they got what they wanted here.
They got 56% of the American market watching that game.
Yeah.
Some of it was because of her.
There was a good amount because of her. All of a sudden, daughters were watching with their dads and actually cared about the football game, which is exciting.
To which my daughter
together.
To which my daughter said, "I won't go across the street to watch Taylor Swift."
Yeah, she's a weird kid, man. She also dresses in all black, so
there is that.
She's got her own things going on. I want to get into something that you and I have been talking about.
We've been talking about this
all week long.
All week, and actually going back a couple of weeks when we really started talking about it. We were comparing notes on who we thought was the greatest quarterback of all time, but then we thought, well, who's the greatest quarterback for each franchise? And we decided we're gonna actually talk about this.
And we went through a couple iterations here because we're like, okay, who's the greatest quarterback of all time? And we looked at teams like the Lions and the Browns, and their quarterbacks, best quarterbacks of all time, haven't played for neither. You've seen everybody play, but in reality,
I never saw Otto Grant,
neither of us have seen
or Bobby Lane.
And so it's like, well, we can't say that we haven't seen him play. And I didn't want this to be a baseball thing that you like to pull with Babe Ruth, where it's like, well, he's the greatest of all time, even though nobody alive ever saw him play. I didn't want to play that game.
Did you not sound like Grover?
You do in my head.
The Muppet. No, but
Grover was Sesame Street, not the Muppets. Technically, he is a Muppet because it's Jim Henson.
It's the same thing.
It's not the same thing. They don't ever. Grover's never with the Muppets. The Muppets are Kermit, Miss Piggy, Fozzie.
In the comments,
Sesame Street.
In the comments, I want people to tell me that Grover is a Muppet.
Only by technicality.
He's a Muppet.
By definition, but nobody thinks there's the Muppets. Like any man puppet, a Muppet is a man puppet, right?
Okay.
So that's the definition of Muppets. They're puppets that.
I've always wanted to be a Muppet Man.
Muppet Man.
Not a man Muppet, but that's just me.
But I need to make this clear. There's the Muppets, which is Kermit and Fozzie and Miss Piggy and
Oscar the Grouch.
No, that's Sesame Street.
They are. Who created them?
Jim Henson.
They're all Muppets.
Okay. Martin Scorsese made how many movies? They're not all the same. It's literally saying, well, Leonardo DiCaprio was in Wolf of Wall Street, and so therefore he is Goodfellas.
A lot of the same actors are in a lot of Scorsese movies. That may not have been the best choice.
But
because he does.
DiCaprio was not in Goodfellas.
No.
So you can't say that. So saying Grover is a Muppet.
Grover is a Muppet.
Nah.
Do your thing.
Nah. You let us know what you think in the comments below on the Muppets. Is Grover a Muppet? Not the question I thought I'd be asking the audience, but a good one nonetheless. You let us know what you think in the comments below, and while you're down there, like, subscribe. hit that notification bell so you get to enjoy this show as much as we enjoy making it. Frenchie jumped in on the squirrel mode on that one. Grover
Really
is
did.
not a Muppet. But I want to get to this. I really do. So we are going to go through the AFC. We're going to like, hey, let's do them all at once. And then it's like, we can't really do that. But again, we're just using Super Bowl era. So from 1965 to today.
1967 was the first Super Bowl.
Okay, 1966 then. It was a 66, 67.
Right.
I was a year behind.
I think the Packers won 3 NFL championships in a row, and they won in 65, which...
And then Super Bowls in 67 and 68, technically, is what it would be. You're right, because the Ice Bowl was December 31st, 1966.
Right, there you go.
So you're right on that one. So 1966 to today, because again, I don't want to choose Otto Graham and Bobby Lane.
Even though especially Otto Graham, he is the greatest quarterback in Cleveland history.
100%. And Bobby Lane, by all technicality, is the greatest quarterback in Lions history. I don't like that conversation. I'd rather do a Super Bowl era. That's how football is judged. We're going to go Super Bowl era. So from 1966 to today, who is the greatest quarterback for each franchise history, starting with the AFC. And I did this by division ranking. So we are going, so you guys know, we are going to do AFC East, then AFC North, AFC South, and then AFC West. And we are going to start with the Buffalo Bills.
I think this one is still pretty straightforward for me. Jim Kelly won 6 straight AFC East titles, went to 4 straight Super Bowls. I still want to know what happens in 1991 if that kicker doesn't kick it wide right. If that would have put him on a roll.
Probably.
But he's also still the Bills' all-time leader in yards and TD passes. I think
Jim Kelly,
Josh Allen at some point, but for now it's
Jim Kelly had a chance to be the greatest quarterback of all time with 4 Super Bowl wins in a row. They had really no competition in the AFC East back then.
He's still on a list because no other quarterback has gotten close to going back to back.
Right.
I mean, that's just an amazing
It'll never happen
achievement.
Again. It really will never happen again. But let's go back a little bit here. You do have Jack Kemp. Let's not forget him. But Jack Kemp was not. He was
really
more
was there
AFL.
3
years. 62 to 69. So he was barely a part of it. Well, you have Joe Ferguson in here.
Very good quarterback.
Ended up winning. He had a losing record, though, so you have to throw him out of there. But so really, it's Jim Kelly and Josh Allen.
Yeah, and I think Josh Allen at some point may eclipse them, but he's got to win a Super Bowl.
Josh Allen has a higher completion percentage. He is in a much shorter time. He has 22,700 passing yards. Jim Kelly had 35,400 passing yards.
Different game.
167 touchdowns to 237. Josh Allen is still pretty young here. If we're looking at winning percentage, Josh Allen has a higher winning percentage. He is 677. Jim Kelly was 631. Great for a longer period of time.
Here's my question.
Is Jim Kelly. He had some really good teams around him. Josh Allen has been his own team.
And that's my question.
Most of it.
That's my question. How long is that body going to hold up? Because he takes way more hits than Jim Kelly ever did.
Here's where it's really interesting, the similarities between them. Jim Kelly, do you know what his postseason record was?
No.
9-8.
Okay.
Josh Allen, 5-5.
I mean,
they're practically identical.
They're 1-1A at this point.
I never saw Jim Kelly play.
I did.
And here's my question to you. If he comes to the Bills right away, don't forget, he
played in Houston.
The USFL for a while.
He was a Houston
Roughnecks.
Houston Gambler.
Was he a gambler?
Yes.
Was there a Roughnecks too?
Yeah, somebody else.
Oh, okay. Would he be better on this list? Or did him sitting out, was that a plan by the Buffalo Bills to get more draft picks and then bring him in?
Back during that time, the USFL was buying a lot of talent. Same as some of the other leagues.
Right.
And the ABA did the same thing and got competition with the NBA. Jim Kelly was the master of the no huddle offense. They called it the K whatever, K shot or whatever. But he just brought something to the game we hadn't seen. He was calling the game and he was taking them up and down the field. But they had great running backs. I'm still giving it to Kelly because they got the 4 straight.
I can't. I'm going Josh Allen. He's a higher winning percentage with arguably worse teams, especially on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah.
I think Josh Allen is already the best quarterbacks in Bills history.
No. I'm still giving it to Kelly because I saw him play. And
fair. On to the Dolphins. I think this one's pretty straightforward.
Dan Marino, 61,361 yards, 420 TDs, which was the record for about 2 decades until our guy Brett Favre broke the record. But here's what I'm going to. So we're both going with Dan Marino.
Yeah.
I'm taking Earl Morrall as my backup. And here's why. He was 11-1 playing for them. He was 9-0 in their perfect season. People forget that without Earl Morrall, and there weren't that many games. I think there were 14 games during
that era. 12.
Maybe 12. He was 9-0. Bob Greasy just came in and won the playoff games, which give him credit for that. But Earl Morrall
won the AFC Championship.
Earl Morrall should be in the Hall of Fame.
Earl Morrall won the AFC Championship. Yeah, Brian Greasy was not the.
No, he just was in the Super Bowl.
Correct.
Earl Morrall should be in the Hall of Fame.
Get this: Earl Morrall went 11-1 with the Dolphins and 22-3 with the Baltimore Colts, which I know we're not at the Colts yet.
No, we're not.
But remember that statistic as we move on. Here's the big difference. Bob Greasy was 6-5 in the postseason. Dan Marino was 8-10. Both pretty close. Dan Marino never had any real teams around him.
Never had a running back.
I mean, I don't think we need to spend time on this. Yeah. Dan Marino is the greatest quarterback of all time. On to the New York Jets.
Okay, so this is where the generation thing comes in, and you're going to call me the old guy. It's obviously Joe Namath for the Super Bowl III miracle. The guarantee. Here's the most important part. If they don't win that game, the AFL-NFL merger might not have taken place.
You're already defending Joe Namath.
Yes.
Because you know the answer is Joe Namath had a losing record with the New York Jets.
But he threw such a great long ball to Don Maynard. They wore those great uniforms.
They were good uniforms.
And white shoes. Joe Namath.
A losing record.
They also had to compete against the Raiders and then the Steelers.
He had a losing
Chiefs
record.
During that 60s era.
The greatest quarterbacks in history don't have a losing record.
Well,
he is the only quarterback, I think, in the Hall of Fame with a losing record.
But he was the most important quarterback in the history of the game.
I agree he should be in the Hall of Fame for that reason, but if you take out that he's not a Hall of Fame quarterback, he had a losing record. So how can you say he's the greatest quarterback in franchise history with a losing record?
Because the other option is like Chad Pennington.
Vinny Testaverde. Vin Testaverde had a .574 win percentage. I mean, if you look at this, Joe Namath leads in touchdown passes. Do you know who's second in touchdown passes in Jets history?
It's not Aaron Rodgers.
No, it's Ken O'Brien. He was a decent player.
He was a decent player.
So was that Pennington. Draft with Montana and Elway and Jim Kelly.
Not Montana. It was.
No, I didn't say Montana.
It was Elway. It was Marino.
Right. Kelly.
The 83.
I said Kelly. I never said Montana.
I thought you said Montana. Sorry.
I said Montana. The water boy joke. Anyway, moving on. You're too old for that one.
That's why you screwed up. Okay.
Now, so you're picking Joe Namath.
I am taking Joe Willie. Absolutely.
I can't pick a quarterback with a losing record. There is a Jets quarterback that has never lost a game with the New York Jets. In fact, the game he started, they won.
Aaron Rodgers?
The greatest quarterback in Jets history is Aaron Rodgers.
After 4 plays.
After 4 plays, you can't pick a quarter. That's my only issue. You can't pick a quarterback that has a losing record.
I mean,
the Jets can. It makes sense.
Yeah. And Aaron Rodgers, just for the record, we'll talk about him next week with the Packers, obviously. He is the best quarterback of all time. Not the greatest, because he hasn't won as much, but as far as talent, he may be the best of all time.
Joe Namath only won 2 playoff games.
But he won.
He was only in the playoffs twice. He was 2-1.
Won the most important game in the history of football.
Just saying, he has the same playoff record as Richard Todd. And he has you know who has the best playoff record? Is Mark Sanchez. He was 4-2 in the playoffs for the New York Jets.
Yeah, but Sanchez is always going to remember for that fumble. Anyway,
I hope Aaron Rodgers helps you.
You know what Namath is remembered for? This, as he's running off the field.
The greatest moment in history, and for what he did for the NFL, he belongs in the Hall of Fame with the guarantee. I agree with all that. But to say, Aaron Rodgers is the best quarterback. He hasn't even played a game. It has to be the answer. I mean, you have Brett Favre on there, too.
Do we need to go
on to the Patriots? We don't need to go through the Patriots. Tom Brady is the greatest Patriots quarterback of all time.
I'll just add runner-up would be either Drew Bledsoe or maybe even Steve Grogan. Let's just.
It's not
Tom
even
Brady.
close. New England Patriots fans, you know the answer to this too. It is Tom Brady. On to a more interesting conversation. I don't know what to say about
Nothing.
it. There's nothing.
Just
to
move
say.
on.
On to the Ravens.
I'm going.
Now the Ravens. Here's the unfair thing about the Ravens, because the Ravens, technically the best quarterback they've ever had is Otto Graham, right? The Ravens were the Browns.
Right. That is true.
And this is where it's going to get unfair when we talk about the Browns, and I'll go more into detail with that later. But technically, this is a franchise, but it's really not. There's a whole history.
Well, we're just taking the franchise, the Ravens version of the franchise, because Otto Graham never played in the Super Bowl era.
No, he didn't. Well, he doesn't count anyway. I'm just saying, like, these are the Browns.
Right.
They moved, and then we're treated like they weren't the Browns. But anyway, we have a couple of quarterbacks here. Who do you got? I got some interesting things here to say.
Okay. At some point, it's going to be Lamar Jackson. But for right now, today, in 2024, I'm still taking Joe Flacco. He took him to the Super Bowl, over 38,000 yards in passing. He leads the team in touchdown passes with 212. I think he was the best of that franchise, although Trent Dilfer is also needs to be mentioned on this.
Trent Dilfer is 4-0 in the playoffs for the Baltimore Ravens. He has an 875 winning percentage. He went 7-1 for that team. It was the defense carrying him. He doesn't have the best statistics, but we're not here to talk about that. So it's hard to really, I mean, his playoff, he had an 83 quarterback rating. He had 3 touchdowns, 1 interception.
Dilfer is looking like one of the most underrated quarterbacks in history.
Okay, here's where Trent Dilfer loses.
What?
His completion percentage in the playoffs was 47.9%.
Yeah, that's the end of it.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
He did.
I agree. Lamar Jackson is going to go down as the best quarterback in Ravens.
He's already the most
talented.
talented.
If you look at how Joe Flacco was in the playoffs, the fact that he won something, Lamar Jackson has to win something first to be considered. He's won some playoff games, and listen, even without that, with how talented he is, he will go down as the greatest quarterback in Ravens history when it's all said and done. I agree with you. If we're saying today, I still think it's a conversation, but it's got to be Joe Flacco.
I think so too.
It really does. I was going to joke and say Trent Dilfer, but then I saw his completion percentage in the playoffs, and now I don't want to say that.
Dilfer gets no love, but he really should get it because he was a really good quarterback.
He was a really good quarterback. He took him to the Super Bowl. Like it or not, he took them to the Super Bowl.
Yes. Okay, now we're moving on.
Okay, so here's what I was talking about before. We're moving on to the Browns. This is where it's unfair for Browns. Like, they leave and win. It's the saddest franchise in history, and they move and win, and they get this. This is where it sucks because the Ravens, which turned into the Ravens, had such a great building block, right?
Yeah, that Browns
team, turning into.
That Browns team was on the verge of being in a Super Bowl and winning.
Correct. And then they leave, and the Browns have to start over and just have bad administration nonstop.
The Browns also set a precedent, which I love. They sued the NFL to keep the Browns name in Cleveland.
Correct.
So there was never going to be a Baltimore Browns.
No.
So really, they've got all the Browns records belong to the Browns and not the Ravens.
I know, but I just feel bad for the Browns.
I feel bad for the Browns fans.
But who do you got for the best quarterback? Let me go through mine here because it's sad. It's sad.
It's not a great list.
It's not a great list. You have, in the Super Bowl era, you have 2 quarterbacks. Well, okay, you have a couple quarterbacks with winning records, but nobody that's played more than 20 games. Let me see here. Nobody that's played more than 16 games has a winning record for the Cleveland Browns.
Okay.
So, in the Super Bowl era. I have, if you look at the list, the highest winning percentage of any quarterback that's played more than 16 games for the Browns is Bernie Kosar. I mean,
is that who I chose?
How can you not choose him? He's 2-3 in the playoffs.
Playoffs.
That's good.
Thank you. I went with Brian Sipe, who played in the 70s.
I don't know how you can pick Brian Sipe, though.
Look,
I mean, if you look at it,
he's at almost 24,000 yards passing, 154 TDs. The Browns haven't had good teams.
I mean, if you look at playoff records, right? 2-3 is Bernie Kosar. He took him to the playoffs 3 times in 3 consecutive years. If you look at Brian Sipe, He only took them to the playoffs once and lost that one playoff game. So if you're looking at greatest quarterbacks of all time, you have to be a winner, right? And Bernie Kosar did win in the playoffs. He won 2 games.
He won 2
and lost 3. Brian Sipe won 0. 0.
Which, when they're that bad, I'm going to go to the guy with the best record.
But you can't, though. The winning percentage.
Do anything
Bernie Kosar has a. That's fair. Bernie Kosar has a higher winning percentage than he does by 1 game. I mean, granted, it's only by 1 game. They both were Pro Bowlers once. Kosar in '87, Sipe. I'm sorry.
And
Snape.
what,
I'm gonna call him Snape.
Yeah.
In '80. So I mean, they're right there. You have to go with Kosar. I'm sorry, I was wrong. Bernie Kosar was actually 3-4. He won 3 playoff games. He took him to the playoffs 4 times.
I went with Sipe. This is one. They're just not a winning franchise, and they haven't been.
No.
I went with Sipe.
And after what they paid Deshaun Watson, they don't deserve to ever be winning.
Exactly.
So I don't really feel bad for him for that very reason.
I almost went with Joe Flacco. He would have won another game.
If you would have won a playoff game, it would have been Joe Flacco. You would have been right on that. I don't know, man. That was a tough list to go through, but you have to go with Bernie Kosar. You have to. He won 3 playoff games, took him 4 times.
We'll see what the viewers think.
Let us know what you think in the comments below and right down there. Like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you get to enjoy the show as much as we enjoy making it. On to the Pittsburgh Steelers. You and I guarantee are going to disagree on this one. This is where generational biases come in play. Because I know who you're going to pick.
It's not even close.
It is very close.
Nope.
You're wrong.
No, I'm not. Terry Bradshaw is a 4-time Super Bowl. Hold on. 4-time Super Bowl champion. The last 2 he won. Because there was at the end of Franco Harris's career. He won that with his arm.
Not give him credit for those. Even though the first 2 was the running game.
He called his own. He still had to call his own plays.
Sure.
He was a 2-time Super Bowl MVP.
Sure.
He was part of the NFL's 19th All-Decade team for the 70s.
Sure.
He is by far and away the greatest quarterback in Steeler history, period.
Came with notes. I was ready for this. Here's the difference, right?
It was a much different game. He actually got hit, by the way.
Yeah, so did Ben Roethlisberger. Ben Roethlisberger had his nose broken and then went back out on the field and played. If you don't remember, his nose was sideways, got it straightened out, and went back out on the field. So I don't want to hear about toughness.
All day long.
I'm not a big Ben Roethlisberger fan as a person. I'm not. Kind of had a rough go there early in his career. Ben Roethlisberger's winning percentage is 670.
Okay.
Terry Bradshaw's is 677. So they're right there neck and neck. The difference is when you talk about in free agency, your players are coming and going a lot more often. The Pittsburgh Steelers are a very good organization and drafted very well, and you got to keep your players. Same thing with the Packers. Don't get me wrong. It's a different time.
It is a different time. It was a different game.
You're talking about completion percentage. Ben Roethlisberger wins. Different game. You talk about yards. It's not even close.
That's not fair.
You talk about touchdowns. It's not even close. Here's the difference. You talk about interceptions. Ben Roethlisberger only has 1 more interception than Terry Bradshaw, and over 200 touchdowns more than Terry Bradshaw. A much higher quarterback rating. Ben Roethlisberger was a great quarterback. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer for a reason. 2-time Super Bowl champion. Went to 3. Lost to the Packers in the 3rd one. This was a really good team. If you're looking at playoff wins, Bradshaw has 14. Roethlisberger has 13.
More teams got into playoffs under Roethlisberger's era.
Not by much.
Oh, yeah.
How many teams got in the Super Bowl or in the playoffs back then?
There may have been 1 wild card, maybe 2.
I mean, 2 wild cards now.
There weren't as many teams back then.
There weren't.
Well, there weren't.
If you're going to say 4 to 6, I don't want to hear it.
No,
I mean, if anything, it works in my favor because Big Ben's lost 10, Terry Bradshaw's lost 5. So it's a little bit different from that point of view. I just don't think it's as easy to say Terry Bradshaw is the clear greatest quarterback in Steelers history. It's not. If you're looking at statistics and what the player meant to the team especially, Ben Roethlisberger meant much more to his teams than Terry Bradshaw meant to his teams, at least early in his career. Later on, you're right, especially those last 2 Super Bowl runs. That was all on Terry Bradshaw's arm.
Don't forget,
The first two, you could have put me in there and they would have won Super Bowls.
that's not true. He
That
still
is true.
Yes, you had Franco Harris,
Here's the thing, too.
Rocky Blyer,
You also had Lynn Swann and
and
I can't think of his name. I counted on you.
You just made me Lynn Swann and why am I forgetting his name?
I don't know. I was relying on you. Stallworth?
Yes.
Was
John Stallworth.
John Stallworth. I'm not supposed to remember this.
I had it until you looked at me and went Lynn Swann and like I was going to say the other name.
You had it. So he had two Hall of Fame receivers, right?
Sure.
And that helps. Big Ben did not. I mean, he had Hines Ward, who was good, borderline Hall of Famer. He had a couple of other, Santana Holmes was pretty good for a while.
I'm not going to deny the fact that if you look at the Steelers of that era, it's like looking at the 60s Packers. Almost all of them are in the Hall of Fame.
They're stacked.
They're very stacked.
They're stacked. The difference with the Packers didn't have the wide receivers that were stacked by any means.
They had Max McGee, who should have been the MVP of that Super Bowl with a hangover.
With a hangover. He got the game of his life.
This is where generationally, you saw Roethlisberger. I saw him. I still don't think he measures up to Terry Bradshaw in my eyes because he was just
so good. Who meant more to their team?
I think because he had to call his own plays. He had to fight with Chuck Noll all the time. They didn't even like each other.
There was a quarter of the playbook back then.
Sure. I'm not arguing that. I still think Terry Bradshaw was the most underrated leader because they all painted him with this good old country boy, kind of dumb, whatever. He was far from that. He was very smart. Wasn't the best quarterback on his college team. That went to the guy from Duck Dynasty, arguably.
Yeah, we don't know how he would have turned out.
Who knows? But it's still a great story.
He was his backup, and then the guy left. Yeah. Terry Bradshaw was still developing, so you can't. For one season, he was the backup quarterback.
I just like the story.
That's all.
Anyways, I think they don't win without Bradshaw on that team. I don't think you could have put Roger Staubach on that team.
The only reason your argument works is because they had somebody starting ahead of Bradshaw who was struggling, which is why they put him in. But at the same time as that team got going again, you could have put a number of quarterbacks back there and had that same success.
I'm not sure you could have. You could have take a look at some of the
Not in the last two. In the last two, I'm just talking the first two Super Bowls. The first two Super Bowls, they ran the ball.
They did.
That's all he was there to do was to hand off the ball. And what made him dangerous is that he could throw that ball a mile down the field, so it opened up the running lanes
when it needed to. So I think it was
that defense won it for him, especially the first two as well.
He was a perfect quarterback for that team. You do that. Ben
Roethlisberger is the greatest quarterback in Pittsburgh Steelers history.
Pittsburgh is.
Who won't be? Whopper Jr. and Kenny Pickett. I don't think he starts next year. We are going to go on to the Bengals, the last AFC North team.
This is where it gets interesting.
There is an answer.
I know. Ken Anderson should be in the Hall of Fame.
I agree with you there. If Kurt Warner's a Hall of Famer, Ken Anderson is most definitely a Hall of Famer.
He threw for just under 33,000 yards.
Ken Anderson is the greatest player not in the Hall of Fame right now.
I'd say so. He got to the Super Bowl, lost to the first Montana 49ers team.
Yep.
I think in the end, the greatest will be the LSU Tiger, Joe Burrow.
Yeah.
But
football Jesus.
But for right now, I'm still giving it to Ken Anderson because Burrow's only got to the Super Bowl once. He lost. So did Ken Anderson. I just really like Ken Anderson. This is from my heart pick.
He took him to the Super Bowl.
He did.
Joe Burrow took him to the Super Bowl.
He's still a leader in yardage. Joe Burrow, like I said, Joe Burrow will be the answer. But Ken Anderson was one of my favorite quarterbacks growing up. He could have probably been on the Steelers of those years.
Here's the thing.
Here's
the thing. Joe Burrow started in 2020, right?
Yeah, he hasn't done enough.
He's missed 2 of those seasons as well, and already has a better winning percentage. Yeah. He has how many yards is he away? He has more than half the yards, right around half the yards Ken Anderson threw. He has half the touchdowns already, and this is in 3 really seasons if you put them together. No, like 2 full seasons. He's been in the league 3 years, and this is in 2 full seasons. He's already put up these numbers. The greatest quarterback already in Bengals history is Joe Burrow.
I'm going to give you my favorite stat about that. It's not a stat, but everybody gives credit to to Bill Walsh, for being, the West Coast offense and
Yeah.
doing that. You know who his first quarterback was
Hmm.
in Cincinnati? Ken Anderson was the first
Yeah.
quarterback of the West Coast offense.
Here's the biggest stat that already proves this, okay? How many playoff games did Ken Anderson win?
Can't answer the question.
2.
Okay.
He was 2 and 1, 2, 3, 4. 2 and 4. How many playoff games has Joe Burrow won in 2 seasons?
4, because he got to the Super Bowl.
He's 5 and 2.
Okay, fine. I'm still taking Ken Anderson.
He already has more playoff wins than any other Bengals quarterback almost combined. He's matched the record of everybody else combined. Boomer Esiason, honestly, he's 3 and 2. He has a better record than Ken Anderson in the playoffs.
Still taking
I'm not
him.
saying he shouldn't be a Hall of Famer for what he did, but it's Joe Burrow. It's already the answer, and it's not even close.
It is. You're right. It's not. It's Ken Anderson, and it's not
come
close
on.
yet.
You can't say it's not close and say it's Ken Anderson.
It is Ken Anderson right now.
Dude.
In my heart.
Dude.
Leave it alone.
Dude.
Let's move on to the South.
On to the South. We are starting with a brand new team, a team since 2005, the Houston Texans. Not a lot to go by here.
I'm going to say it again. CJ Stroud will pass the guy I chose in about 2 years.
Yeah.
Give him 2 more years and he's there. But I took Matt Schwab, excuse me, 2-time Pro Bowler, 23,000 passing yards, 124 TDs.
Yeah.
The only reason I'm taking him is because CJ Stroud is a rookie.
Right. He leads the franchise in touchdown passes, yards, not completion percentage, but completions and attempts. I mean, he's the best quarterback in this. I mean, I wanted to put CJ Stroud just to be funny on there, but it's been 1 year. You don't know what's going to happen. It's not Deshaun Watson.
No.
Even if you look at it statistically, this isn't even me just saying I don't like Deshaun Watson, right? If you look at it statistically, Matt Schaub was a better quarterback than Deshaun Watson was during his career.
Mm-hmm.
Deshaun Watson was hurt a lot.
He was.
He's hurt a lot in Houston. Hurt a lot now. Matt Schaub was the consistency the Texans needed. Yes, he had a great receiver who should be in the Hall of Fame very soon as well, but it is Matt Schaub at this point. I think in 2 years, it's going to be C.J. Stroud as
That's what I said.
quarterback in Texas.
Why do you agree with me?
I do agree with you. On to another new team since 1995. It is the Jacksonville Jaguars. This is where I'm looking through the numbers here. Here's the problem. Nothing's really sticking out.
No.
It's like nobody wants. It's the same thing with the Browns. Nobody wants to be the best quarterback in the franchise.
Which is why the franchise hasn't won anything. Look, I'm going with the former Packer. I'm going with lefty Mark Brunell.
There's not another choice.
He's the all-time leader in yards, touchdowns, completions. He's got over 25,000 yards of passing, 144 TDs. He was a 3-time Pro Bowler. He was the MVP of one of them. Trevor Lawrence has a lot to prove.
He's not the answer yet. He
Not
just saw
yet.
more slump. He'll figure. I think it will be in the future. I still have a lot of hope in him. David Garrard was a fun run for a few years. Brian Leftwich was interesting. He only played for 3 years. I didn't realize that. He had a winning percentage. Mark Brunell has the second highest winning percentage in franchise history for started more than half a season.
He's the only one.
It has to be Mark Brunell right now. It's the only answer. I'd like to give a different answer. Took the team to an AFC championship. The only other quarterback in Bengals history to do that, Jaguars history to do that is Blake Bortles. And that was because he had the best game of his career the week before.
Right.
I mean, it's
some would say the only good game of his career, but he did get them there.
It's Mark Brunell is the answer.
Okay, so let's move on.
And let's move on.
Indianapolis. This is where it gets interesting.
Jinx, you want me to go?
Yes, I do. Obviously, Johnny Unitas is there, but he got the one Super Bowl.
Johnny Unitas doesn't count.
No, he does because he was in Super Bowl V.
That's right. He was in Super Bowl V.
Earl Morrall started the game. Colts got behind.
Yeah, he was in 3 too.
Or in 3, rather. I meant 3. They won 5. And Johnny Unitas wasn't there anymore.
He was in Super Bowl 3.
So he counts, but most of his records were in the 50s. He won 3 titles back in the 50s. It's Peyton Manning for me. 55,000 passing yards, a 94.9 passer rating, 399 TDs.
Now,
he got to the Colts to 2 Super Bowls. He won 1.
Here's the thing. I said remember a stat earlier in this conversation. Earl Morrall was 22-3 for the Indianapolis Colts. Now he choked in Super Bowl
for
III.
the Baltimore Colts.
The Baltimore Colts. I'm sorry. The Colts, whatever. He's 22-3. He only lost 3 games. One of those games he lost was the Super Bowl.
He played pretty bad. Well,
he had a bad game.
He had a bad game against the Jets. They brought in Johnny Unitas. Some people say if Unitas would have started the game, they might have won. Who knows? Earl Morrall should be in the Hall of Fame. I'm just going to say it again because I think he does.
Yeah, Kurt Warner's in the Hall of Fame. And Earl Morrall was actually benched for Hall of Famers.
Would you stop with the Kurt Warner? I'm going to have to hear this all next week again. Anyways.
Next week it gets really hard.
I think it's Peyton Manning and not really close.
Dude, it's not even close. I mean, Andrew Luck had a chance. He left too early. Earl Morrall, though, again, you have a quarterback that was 22-3. I don't think that's enough starts. And the fact that he did play so bad in that Super Bowl discounts it completely. Peyton Manning is the answer, and it's really not even that close.
No.
Moving on.
This is the interesting one because it's the Tennessee Titans, but it is also the Houston Oilers.
You need to include the Houston Oilers.
Because they were both during the Super Bowl era.
Correct.
For me, it's not close. It is Warren Moon. Guy had to play his first 7 years in Canada because of just out-and-out racism, which is ridiculous. He's one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time in his short time. 34,000 passing yards, 196 TDs, 58% completions percentage. He was a first ballot Hall of Famer in 2006. Or not a first ballot, but he went in the Hall in 2006.
He put up some good stats. He was a 500 quarterback. He had a 504 win percentage.
The team, they didn't. If he would have been on that team with Earl Campbell,
I can't say that. If
a dog eats a tree,
if a dog, yeah.
I
was gonna say if donuts and nuts. I don't remember the Office thing. I ruined it.
He's one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time.
I'm not. Here's the thing, though. He had great stats, but you had a really good Houston team, especially with Earl Campbell being your running back, and you didn't win.
Warren Moon wasn't the quarterback of those teams. That was Dan.
Earl Campbell.
That was Dan Pastorini.
Really?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, and then after that, it was Ken Stabler, actually.
Yeah, he played some games. I saw that on here. I asked you some questions about that.
Yeah.
But he's a 500 quarterback. He's a 500 quarterback. If you look at the playoffs, because again, to be the greatest, you have to win. You have to win the game.
Thank you, Herb.
You're welcome. He was 2-3.
Yeah.
Steve McNair took them to a Super Bowl. Steve McNair was
missed the win by
5-4. Literally by that
much.
He was a 5-4, had 5 wins, 4 losses in the playoffs. Almost won a Super Bowl for that team. If you're looking at statistic-wise, they weren't that far apart in yards. Warren Moon, 33,000. Steve McNair, 27,000. I get if Warren Moon had been in the league, and I'm not denying you that he's the better quarterback, but we're talking the better quarterback for a franchise, right? For the franchise, they were very, very close. If you're talking touchdowns, they're not that far apart. If you're talking interceptions, he had a lot less interceptions. Completion percentage, Steve McNair had a better completion percentage.
Let's do it this way. Warren Moon was the greatest Houston Oiler. Steve McNair was the greatest.
Steve McNair played for the Houston Oilers, too. So
yeah, but he's more known as a Tennessee
He's known as Titan because of Super Bowl.
Right.
I got to go Steve McNair on this one. He had the better playoff record. The stats aren't that far apart. I never saw Warren Moon play.
I did. He was one of the most fun quarterbacks I've ever seen play.
But if you're looking at statistics alone, Steve McNair had a 580 win percentage. Warren Moon was a 500 quarterback.
I don't care.
That's it. He was one game above 500. Here's one for you. Who has the highest winning percentage of any Titan-Oiler of all time?
Well, it's not George Blanda.
It is not George Blanda.
Maybe Dan Pastorini?
It is Vince Young.
Oh.
Vince Young was 30-17. Ryan Tannehill actually had a 619 win percentage, or still does. He's still the quarterback there. Then Steve McNair, then George Blanda, then Warren Moon. Dan Pastorini actually had a losing record.
On some of the best teams they ever had.
Yeah. Not good stuff.
Anyways, moving on to the West.
Moving on to the West. So you're going Warren Moon, right?
Yes.
I'm going Steve McNair.
Okay.
I have to. The Kansas City Chiefs. I dare you to make an argument against Patrick Mahomes.
I can't. I mean, Len Dawson would be the second great quarterback, won the Super Bowl 4 over the Vikings.
Yep.
Go, Len Dawson.
Hall of Famer?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's
Number 16's retired.
That's right.
But it's not even close.
That's right. That's why, what's his name couldn't wear it.
Yeah, that's not even close. Patrick Mahomes.
So get this. Patrick Mahomes' win percentage is 771. He is 74-22.
It's crazy.
His playoff record is 14-3. The guy's 28 years old, and he's 14-3 in the playoffs.
Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes was a marriage made by
Absolutely
God himself.
crazy.
It's just crazy how good they are.
Patrick Mahomes has 219 touchdowns to Len Dawson's 237. He's going to pass that next year. Yards, he's less than 100 yards. He'll pass that in the first game of next year. If not, I mean, he will. I mean, he's 100 yards away. He'll pass in the first game next year.
The game, I'm surprised he hasn't done it already. The game was so different back in that day. Len Dawson was a great quarterback, but Patrick Mahomes is otherworldly. He may go down as the greatest quarterback of all time.
I have two questions for you.
Okay.
One, I just have one. The other one I don't think you'll ever know. I'm going to ask anyways, though. Who is in third place in Kansas City Chiefs history in both touchdown passes and passing yards?
Joe Montana?
No. Montana was only there 2 years.
I don't know. He's the only other Kansas City quarterback I could come up with.
Trent Green.
Wow.
Yeah.
Forgot he was even there.
Trent Green. Alex Smith was very close. He had 118 touchdowns. Or Trent Green had 118 touchdowns and 21,000 yards when he was there. I remember when he was there. He went there after, I think it was after
the Rams. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was after the Rams. He was pretty good. But that's another point. He would have won with the Rams. He would have been the first ballot Hall of Famer instead. But
on to the Raiders.
Anyway, also, Len Dawson has a 7-time Pro Bowl selection, All-Star, because that's what it was called back then. Patrick Mahomes 6. He will tie that next year and probably pass it the year after. Patrick Mahomes is clearly the answer. Yes. On to the Raiders. Again, this is actually a fun conversation. I was going to say something different just because of recent. If you look at recent, it's again, who wants to be the best quarterback of all time? But looking at this, they actually had some really good quarterbacks.
They did, but I don't think it's close. I mean, I remember as a kid watching the Raiders, and George Blanda came in the fourth quarter of a bunch of games in a row to win them. It was just uncanny how many times he did that. But if we're talking greatest quarterbacks of all time, for me, it's Ken Stabler. He was the leader he was one of the most accurate passers of the 70s. He won them their Super Bowl 11, I believe, 217 touchdowns. But what was most impressive to me, he was a leader of the bad boy Raiders, the Lyle Alzado, Cliff Branch, Fred Biletnikoff, Ted Hendricks, and he kept them all together. And he was just that magic.
Great. You like his story. Ken Stabler isn't even the third best quarterback, arguably, in Raiders history.
No, let me finish. The guy I had in second place should be in the Hall of Fame, but isn't. Jim Plunkett won 2 Super Bowls. Ken Stabler won 1.
Mm-hmm.
I love Jim Plunkett, but I really think Ken Stabler is the best. The Snake is the best quarterback.
Ken Stabler was your favorite player growing up as a kid, and so he doesn't count.
He was one of them.
This is bias.
No, it's not.
Bias.
No.
You like Ken Stabler.
No.
That is because of a Kurt Warner argument.
No.
He had a good story.
No.
What's the story you told me before we started the show? He used to sit in the bar and read the playbook by bar light. That is story. That has nothing to do with him on the field.
He still deserved it for the other records.
Listen, he had a 724 winning percentage, only second to Dan LaMonica, or Daryl LaMonica.
Daryl LaMonica, the bad bomber.
So I give it to you there. He's one of the leaders in touchdowns. Second place, only Derek Carr's ahead of him. He was a great player for them. If you're looking at the greatest quarterback of all time.
Guy was on that team as well, by the way.
Okay.
Greatest punter in history.
Good for a punter. If you're looking at playoff records, okay? Let me go this way. Here's the thing. There's a player on there who, for the 5 years he was with the Raiders, was the best quarterback in the league.
He wasn't the starter on any of those until the end.
Rich Gannon was.
Rich Gannon.
Rich Gannon was with them from 99 to 2004. He won an MVP, was a 4-time Pro Bowler, took them to a Super Bowl, would have taken them to another Super Bowl had it not been for the Tuck
Did
rule.
They win the Super Bowl?
No, they lost to the
Ken Stabler won his.
No, I get it. Okay. I'm just saying, if you're looking at a time frame for the best quarterback in Raiders history, nobody had a greater 5-year stretch for the Raiders than Rich Gannon did. Rich Gannon is up there for greatest of all time. If we're talking greatest of all time, look at Daryl LaMonica, who had a 774 winning percentage for the Raiders. If you look at his playoffs, that's where he struggled. He was 4-5. He had a losing record in the playoffs. Rich Gannon had a 4-3 winning percentage in the playoffs. Ken Stabler was 7-4. Jim Plunkett was 8-2. If you are looking for greatest quarterback in franchise history, the greatest in franchise history. It is Jim Plunkett. Jim Plunkett started 2 seasons and won 2 Super Bowls.
He did.
You don't get any better than that. He had a 667 winning percentage. For the time he actually started, he threw 80 touchdowns. He had 12,665 yards, and this is in 3 seasons of work.
That's why I can't understand why he's not in the Hall of Fame.
Jim Plunkett has to go down, and 8-2. His winning percentage in the playoffs is second only to Bart Starr.
It's crazy.
How does this happen? How is he so bad for the Patriots and then so good for the Raiders?
I think because
the
Patriots
is he backup for the Raiders and then only brought in because somebody got hurt.
The Patriots were a badly run franchise at that time. He was the number 1 draft pick, and he just think of David Carr.
Yeah.
He was just put into a bad situation. He gets to Oakland, and it was Oakland at the time.
Yeah.
It just seemed to mesh. He had the right coach. He had the right team. He had great receivers.
Yeah.
And he won the Super Bowl twice. And people still don't consider him a Hall of Famer, and I don't understand it.
I've said it once, I'll say it again. Kurt Warner's a Hall of Famer. Jim Plunkett's a Hall of Famer. Jim Plunkett has to go down. I will say, if you're talking about just time with the Raiders, Ken Stabler's third on that list, maybe fourth behind Darryl LaMonica. Rich Gannon, again, that 5-year stretch is the greatest 5-year stretch any Raider has ever had. If you're looking at Jim Plunkett for the 2 years he really started for the Raiders, again, 8-2 playoff record, won 2 Super Bowls.
I'm not using
Stabler.
I'm not using this as an excuse. I'm really not. Stabler had to go against the greatest team of the 1970s in the playoffs every year. And he got by them once.
Right. No, and that has something to do with it. You're not using an excuse. That's the truth.
That is the truth.
Right?
I mean, the
they
Steelers
lost
were just
on an immaculate reception. I almost said conception. That was Mary.
Yeah.
Sorry. An immaculate reception. So, yes, that counts. It does definitely count as a partial excuse. But you know who didn't lose to any other teams in the playoffs was Jim Plunkett.
Okay. I'm not arguing that much about Plunkett because I love him and he was my second pick. I just think Ken Stabler embodies what the Raiders
you liked him as a player.
I loved him as a player.
See, it's bias. It doesn't count.
Bias.
If anything, again, he may be fourth on this list of greatest quarterbacks of the Super Bowl era.
We need to talk about the Broncos, or can we just give it to John Elway and move on with our day?
Hear me out.
God, what did you come up with? If you say Peyton Manning, I'm going to scream. It'd be like saying Russell Wilson.
Peyton Manning had a 5-3 playoff record. He had a 789 winning percentage, the highest winning percentage for any quarterback I've seen ever.
He could barely throw a ball at that point of his career. He was like a shot put.
45-12. I mean, if you look at it, though, he threw 140 touchdowns for the Broncos. So you can't say that. Okay, it worked.
It worked. I'm not arguing.
A lot of dead ducks, and a lot of those dead ducks went in for touchdowns.
Yes, they did.
He threw 140 touchdowns to only 53 interceptions. He had a 66.5% completion percentage, which is 10% higher than John Elway. Took him to 2 Super Bowls, won 1.
Peyton Manning's strongest muscle was between his ears.
Yeah.
He was brilliant. Sure. John Elway is the best quarterback in Bronco history. It's not even close. It's not.
Peyton Manning won a Super Bowl.
John Elway won
789 winning percent. I'm trying. I don't
know. You know how hard it is for me to say Elway is the greatest quarterback? Yeah. I am not a Elway fan for a very specific reason.
Though, I mean, if you're looking at completion percentage again, Peyton Manning did have 10% higher than John Elway. John Elway, I mean, the few times that Peyton Manning made it to the playoffs and the few years he was there, he was either in a Super Bowl losing or in a Super Bowl winning 2 out of those 3 years. John Elway lost a Super Bowl and didn't get back or even close for a very long time until a running back came out of nowhere and carried that team.
Yes.
John Elway didn't carry that team at all. Peyton Manning, for all the injuries he had, carried that team. They had very bad running backs at that time.
Elway had 51,500 yards passing, 300 touchdowns. It's John Elway. Peyton Manning's got the Colts.
Elway's got a better defense, but if you look at it,
Elway was part of that class of '83 as well.
I'm trying, folks, but it is John Elway, but there is an argument for Peyton Manning on that team.
We're down to the Chargers, who have. There's several quarterbacks in this conversation.
There are. And I think I'm going to surprise you with my answer here because it is a very good answer. But I'm going to let you go first because I'm going to listen to you defend Dan Fouts.
Again, some of this is from the heart because if you look at stats, Phillip Rivers' stats are probably better. But Dan Fouts was the leader for the Eric Coryell offense. He had 43,000 yards throwing. He threw to guys like John Jefferson, Wes Chandler, Helen Winslow Sr., Charlie Joyner. He went in the Hall of Fame in 1993. I've got Phillip Rivers as second, but you also have to include Stan Humphries in that conversation because he got them to their only Super Bowl.
He did.
So
Dan Fouts, again, a 500 quarterback. 2 games above 500, 506 winning percentage.
Yeah. I love Dan Fouts.
I mean, he just a Hall of Famer because of the offense he was in, but again, plug and play here. I mean,
no, not during that time. There was nobody that could throw the ball like Dan Fouts during that time.
I never saw him play.
Of course.
So, but it's definitely not Dan Fouts.
It is Dan Fouts.
It is not. Phillip Rivers has a 549 winning percentage. He had a better winning percentage in the playoffs, even though they both had losing percentages in the playoffs. Dan Fouts was 3-4. Rivers was 5-6, and neither of them took them to a Super Bowl.
I was going to say, if using that argument, Stan Humphries should be your guy.
The stats, if you're really looking at statistics, Rivers had a 64 completion percentage, Dan Fouts 58. If you're looking at yardage, 59,000, almost 60,000 to Dan Fouts 43,000. Touchdowns, more than 120 more touchdowns with less interceptions. Dan Fouts was 254 touchdowns to 242 interceptions.
Just remember. But yeah, but that was a different time when interceptions weren't
a different time.
No, interceptions weren't as big a deal. I mean, they just weren't. People threw more of them during that time. The game I remember the most about Dan Fouts is against Miami, 5 overtimes.
Yeah.
And Fouts won.
Yep.
It was arguably the greatest game ever played, with all due respect to the 58 championship, which I did not see.
It's not the Super Bowl, so it doesn't matter.
I know, but it was the championship. Dan Fouts, I still think is the guy, even though I will admit.
Let me
Rivers
ask you this:
right
you know the games I remember most about Dan Fouts?
No, you never saw one of them.
In the playoffs.
You never saw them.
The greatest quarterback in Chargers history is Stan Humphries
because he got to a Super Bowl.
And
nobody would.
He had a 3-3. He had a 500 playoff record.
And nobody would say that he was the greatest quarterback in that franchise's history.
He is, though.
He's not.
He is. He had a 618 winning percentage, which is higher than either Phillip Rivers or Dan Fouts. From 92 to 97, he was the starting quarterback with a 618 winning percentage.
Remind me
on a team that really had no reason to be that good.
Remind me to tag him when we put this video out, because it's the only time his name is going to come up in the next decade.
Listen, I didn't know who he was, but if you're really looking at I have a big belief, to be the greatest quarterback in a franchise history, you have to win, and you have to win when it counts. Dan Fouts was a 500 quarterback. Phillip Rivers was barely more than a 500 quarterback at a 550 win percentage. Dan Humphries had a 618 winning percentage on teams that really didn't belong being that good. They had Junior Seau on those teams, one of the greatest linebackers of all time, but other than that, they didn't have much. He has a 500 winning percentage in the playoffs, which isn't anything special, but it's better than any other quarterback they have. The only other quarterback to ever have a winning percentage was before the Super Bowl era.
Okay.
And that's in Tobin Rote, who I've never heard of in my entire life.
Tobin Rote was actually really good. His son, I think, was Kyle Rote, was actually really good.
What did Kyle write?
He didn't wrote anything. I think he ended up being like an Olympic athlete of some kind.
Really?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh.
Or a
Super Bowl era doesn't
or a
count
soccer,
either way.
or he was one of the first great soccer players. I can't remember.
Well, his name was Kyle, so that means he's one of the greatest of all time.
Okay.
But if you really look honestly, if you're looking at a quarterback for a span of time, and this was from 92 to 97, Stan Humphries, I mean, how do I not know this guy's name? I mean, he literally is the best quarterback in the Super Bowl era for the Chargers. He took them to got blown out in the Super Bowl, but that was a Niners team that just wasn't going to lose that game.
They weren't.
Dan Fouts, I get it. You hear his name all the time for Eric Coryell offense. He was on the air for a long time. I know him from Waterboy. He was the announcer on Waterboy. Phillip Rivers obviously was really good for a long time, but
was.
never got anybody anywhere. It is Stan Humphries as the greatest quarterback in Charger history.
Okay.
Period.
Whatever you say.
Bottom line, end of story. But you let us know what you think in the comments below. And while you're down there, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you get to enjoy this show as much as we enjoy making it. It is the NFC next week.
That will be
I know the
interesting.
quarterbacks you're going to name.
No, you don't.
And I'm already mad at you, so don't miss that. We have had a great show.
We have.
But as you all know, you cannot have a conversation with your father without your dad getting the last word, so it is all you.
So it's time for me to make some Milwaukee Bucks fans very upset, but this is the reality of the situation. Giannis is getting too big for Milwaukee. He came here as a small-town kid. He was a young player, drafted 15th, and he worked his butt off to become the greatest player in the NBA, and he won an NBA championship. But that's not enough for him anymore. He wants more. Mark my words. He's very hungry for more. I've seen subtle changes in his attitude. He snipped at a reporter at the end of last season, which I've never seen Giannis do. He's been one of the most accommodating professional athletes I've ever seen in my life. They brought in a new coach, and Giannis was part of the hiring process. Yet when the reality hit, Giannis really wasn't that happy with the coach, and he was asked to leave the team. And now they brought in Doc Rivers. And Doc is going to work better, I think, with Giannis because he's better with more veteran players. But they also brought in Damian Lillard, who was supposed to be the Dame time at the end of the games, and yet I think he's only had one game-winning shot. The Bucks have to figure this out and work as a team. If the Bucks don't win the Larry O'Brien Trophy this year or next year, I think Giannis is going to be looking for bigger and brighter pastures. If you look at Giannis, his marketing opportunities in Milwaukee are infinitesimal compared to what he can get in Los Angeles or New York. But I think he's looking further. He's looking at the New York or the Los Angeles market more specifically. One of his mentors has turned out to be Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Kareem won a title in Milwaukee, and then he wanted bigger opportunities. And he went to the Bucks ownership and said, "Look, trade me, get what you can get for me, but I want to go to LA or New York." He ended up in LA, part of the Showtime Lakers. The rest is history. He made a fortune as a marketer out in LA, and Giannis could do the same thing. The Bucks love him. They signed him to a long-term contract, but mark my words, if he doesn't win this year or next year, his people will be knocking on the Bucks door saying Giannis wants to go someplace else. It's time for him to be able to go to another market to try to win a championship, and I see him going to LA within 3 years if the Bucks don't win.
Why do you have to say such mean things?
It's not mean, it's just reality.
No, I disagree. He's going to be a small town boy forever.
Not if he doesn't win.
Small town boy.
If he wins this year and next year, he may stay a Buck forever. But I hear LA calling. I mean, Kareem is in his ear.
Listen, you're right. I don't want to hear it. Thank you, as always, so much for watching. This has been Sports Talk with Dad, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.